Hi, welcome to the training webinar. I'm Dale Franks, and this week we're going to talk about building a callable sub-process that you can call from multiple applications. However, I'm not going to simply repeat the same webinar I did on this topic well over a year ago. We're going to review that, and we're going to look at it, but I'm going to do some experimentation today, and we're going to play around with some different methods of doing this than the initial one that I've created and the one that I'll demonstrate to you in the first part of the webinar. Now, because this is going to be a fair amount of experimentation when I get to building things, some things may go wrong. So this may turn into a complete disaster. I don't know. That's why I always have a completed application done so that I can at least prove that I know what I'm doing and that I have done this before. So we're going to see how this works as we go through it. And we're just going to try some different ways of accomplishing the same goal, which is calling a callable sub process. There is more than one way to skin a cat, and we're going to try to do a little cat skinning to make that happen. Before we get into that, though, I do need to cover some administrative stuff with you about the webinar videos themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now, and we're going to go ahead and look at the webinars page of the support website. And this doesn't seem to be aligned exactly, so let me realign it here. Sorry about that. Just needed to fill up the screen properly. So this is the webinars page on the support site. You actually get here from the big camera icon on the blue navigation bar on the home page. Oh, by the way, I've also redone the home page a little bit. I've slightly redesigned it. I've moved the links to the customer satisfaction survey and the link to the webinars page down lower on the page. I've moved the important announcements up to the top of the page. And of course, at the bottom of the page is still the custom GPT AI-powered chatbot at the bottom of the page. But if you go to the webinars page and you scroll way, way, way down to the bottom, there is a new link here called Legacy Webinar Video Search. I think that this was a suggestion that was given to me by Dan Kruger at UW Stout. Hi, Dan. I see that you're here. Welcome. And it may not have been Dan. I get people asking me to do things fairly frequently, so sometimes I forget who asked me. So if I've misattributed this, I'm sorry. But the fundamental problem is that I was asked to make all of the webinar videos non-public. There's three tiers of videos. There is public, which is just everybody can see it. There is private, which means only I can see it. And then there's this weird middle tier where it's called unlisted. Now, if you have the link to the video, you can still see it. And so there were links to the Spotlight webinar videos where you could link to those videos. There's links on the homepage of the doc site to the playlists on YouTube. So as long as you have access to the URL for the playlist or any of the individual videos, you can watch them. However, because they're unlisted, they don't show up in search. So you can't search for them. You can't find any of these old videos. So the reason that they asked me to make them unlisted was because we were working on the new UI, and they didn't like having a whole bunch of public videos showing the old UI. And so all of the videos that I did, in like 2024 and earlier, those are all with the 5.44 UI, which I was asked to make unlisted so that UI wasn't displayed, because what they really wanted to do was roll out the new UI and only show the new UI and not show the old UI. It was a little outdated. After all, we haven't changed that UI since 2017 or so, whatever, maybe 16 with version 4.5. So it's been a while. Now, the problem with that is that once you make something unlisted, you can't search for the videos if they're unlisted, which means that all the training webinar and all the Spotlight webinar videos, once they were made private, you can't search them. Now, since we switched over to the 6.1 UI, and I've been presenting webinars with the 6.1 UI, all of those are public on YouTube. So those are all visible. Those are all searchable. The problem is, what if you want to look at some of the older videos and you can't search them on YouTube because they're still unlisted? So I made a legacy webinar video search, which is linked right here on the bottom of the webinars page. So if you click that, it actually opens up a process director form. And you can do a search. You don't have to put in a search term. You can just hit search and it will return all of those legacy videos as a search. And obviously this is just a regular form that just has an array. And the links to the videos are on the very first column here. So if I was to do a search for, let's say, well, let's just do a search for layout since I see that word on there. So we'll just do a search for layout and we'll search for it. So all of the videos with layout. So here's accessibility and responsiveness. Here's the form controls overview. Here's the responsive layout controls. And if I click that, then it will just take me to YouTube and it will show you this old video on the responsive layout controls. See the old style of video.
Good morning.
Yeah, this is
Thursday.
old. Those are my old glasses, and I'm
Webinar
down
for this week, and this week we're
which I no
once again
longer
doing
do
something
anymore.
we haven't
I look
really
like I'm
covered
way too
before.
close to the camera.
We're going to talk about
In the
the
event,
response.
this search feature allows you to go in and just use some sort of keyword and just search for a video with this legacy webinar video search. So I think this solves the problem of not being able to find the old videos. And by the way, you can see how old the video is. Well, the one that I clicked is all the way from back in 2022. So that video is, well, at this point, 2.5 years old. So you can do this search. It's available to you. You can access it directly from the training or the support website on the webinars page. Of course, once you go here, you can just copy the URL or hit Control-D in your browser and you can just bookmark it. And so you can go to this search form and you can find all of the old videos. So I just wanted to clear that out of the way, let you know that that was a new feature. Well, it's not really a feature. It is a search that I created for you so that you can search all of the old videos that can't be searched on YouTube. So they're all available to you now. All right, so with that in mind, let's talk about building callable sub-processes. So we're going to do two things. We're going to look at how I initially set up a callable sub-process that you can call from any process. In fact, I have two processes that will enable me to call it, and we'll go through those real quick, and then we'll go ahead and take a look in the details of how it works. And then second half, I'm going to actually start building this out, but we're going to try a couple of different things to see what happens when we build a callable sub process in different ways, because there are different ways that you can do it. The way that I've done it here with my completed project is only one way. We'll explore some other methods for calling this that actually, technically, in my mind, should be a little easier. But we're going to do a little experimentation in the second half. In the first half, let's talk about callable sub-processes. So anytime that you create an approval process, you may find that some types of approvals get repeated a lot. Now, in this case, what I've done is a legal review process, because that always seems like a good candidate for a process that has to be called from a whole bunch of different places. For example, you might need legal approval just to put out some marketing or advertising materials. Certainly, if you're in any sort of regulated industry, you're going to need to have legal approval for almost all of your marketing materials. If you make physical products, the labeling that you put on products has to, I mean, that's regulated as well. You have to pass FTC regulatory, if not approval, because a lot of times there's no approval, but there are regulatory requirements that have to be part of your product labeling. Different products have different regulatory requirements. You need to be sure that your labeling on a new product, for example, is approved by legal. Personnel actions. If you feel like you need to fire somebody or you need to do some sort of disciplinary action, you may need to have not just HR, but legal take a look at what it is you're trying to do, especially if it is an employee for which you have a contract and you're trying to terminate that contract. You might need to ensure that this is reviewed by legal to ensure that whatever the reason you're terminating the contract for are allowable under the contract that you have signed. Or you may need to have the employee sign an NDA on their departure. Perhaps the employee has already filed some sort of complaint against you that you're trying to resolve, and an NDA will be part of that resolution. So obviously for some personnel actions, you're going to need legal approval as well. PR releases and announcements that you make, any sort of public statements, probably have to go through legal approval. There's a whole bunch of different processes that you might go through to approve any of these things, all of which are going to require some sort of legal approval. Now, how am I going to implement that legal approval? So we'll call this legal approval, and other approvals of this type, we'll call them standard approvals, because the approval process is largely going to be the same. It's going to need the same reviewers, and you're going to be calling it over and over from a whole bunch of different places. Now, you do have the option, always, of course, of just taking this legal approval process and just building it into every other process you build. You certainly do that. The trouble is, if that legal approval process ever needs to change, because you've already got it built into as an integral part of other timelines that you've built, then you may have to go back and change a whole bunch of timelines, all of which are calling the same, essentially the same legal approval process. Well, they're not really calling it, it's built into the timeline. So if you're going to change that process, that implies that you're going to have to go into all of those timelines that use a legal approval, and you're going to have to edit those timelines to update them. Well, you don't want to do that because let's say you got 30 of them and you have to go through and edit 30 timelines. That's a bit of a pain. Ideally, if you have a standalone callable sub-process for your legal approval, all you have to do is call it, which means it exists in one single place, has one set configuration, and if you ever have to change it, that's the only thing you ever have to change. So as far as your job as a process administrator goes, it makes your life a lot easier to have to go in and change one callable sub-process than it would take to have to go back and individually edit 20 or 30 separate processes that just happen to encapsulate the same sort of legal approval steps that you could just simply bifurcate out into a standalone process. And so that's what we're going to do today. And I have this legal process, and it is a standalone process. It has its own legal approval form. It has its own process timeline, which, by the way, we'll look at. So here's my legal approval process. The process gets kicked off, and because it's a standalone process, it can get kicked off by the submission of a legal approval form, or because I can use it as a sub-process, I can kick it off from another process. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The process itself is pretty simple. It goes to a paralegal. That paralegal reviews the request, And then if it needs to be reviewed by a contract attorney or a regulatory attorney or an IP attorney, the paralegal can just select which of those attorneys, some or all of them perhaps, who have to look at it, and then finishes the paralegal review process and sends it on to whoever it needs to review it. It may be contracts, regulatory, and or IP. And then when those three sections have looked at it, it finally goes to the general counsel for the firm, and the general counsel can review and approve it, and then our legal process is over. So in my case, I have a legal approval form, and because it is a standalone process, I can simply run the legal approval form, and I can put in the information that the lawyers need to be able to submit the form. I can choose whether it requires contract or IP review, or the paralegal can choose that. I have it all visible here, so it is a little confusing. So this should be all I see at the top. Here's my explanation of what I need lawyers to look at. Obviously, there might be documents that would have to be attached to this and other things. I didn't want to make this too complicated, so I just put this explanatory field on here. And once I've told the lawyers what I think they need to know, I'll go ahead and submit the form. All right, so now we are looking at the paralegal action. And so the paralegal, let's say that this is going to require an intellectual property lawyer to look at. And I've now finished my job as a paralegal, and I can submit it. So now we are in the IP review action, and the IP reviewer can say something and they can complete their task. And now we're in the review by general counsel. So in this case, we skipped contract review and we skipped regulatory review. We went straight into IP review. That is finished. The IP lawyer made his comments. I'm now as general counsel reviewing it. I can say, great, it's been approved. And I hit reviewed by GC and it's over. My process is complete. So it's a standalone process. It's a fully functional process. If I just need someone who wants a generic legal approval for something outside of, a different process, I've got a process for that. I can just kick off a legal approval process simply by submitting the legal approval form. On the other hand, I have other processes that also require legal approval. I have generic process 1 and generic process 2. So let's take a look at generic process 1. Now, the timeline for these processes are both exactly the same. And for the most part, most of the activities for the approval are irrelevant. We don't actually care about the approval here. What we do care about are two things. We care about what happens if the lawyers don't approve it. How do I handle that? And by the way, how do I get the lawyers to approve it in the first place? Now, the way that I have created this particular process is I have 3 steps, the central one of which is a process activity. This process activity calls the legal approval process and kicks it off. So it is, as I said, a process activity. It kicks off the legal review process. And both the copy objects from subprocess and copy objects in timeline to child, they're both checked. Because I do want to send the forms in my parent process to my child process and from my child process back up to the parent process. So I have that legal approval form and I am going to use it. So since that is so, I need to be sure that I have both of those forms attached to both processes. Now, the way that I chose to do this is just one way. And like I said, we're going to do some experimentation here in a little bit to call this subprocess in some different ways. But for right now, that's how I have it set up. And to make it work, I need to do 2 things. Number one, I have to be sure that I get the legal approval form included in my parent process first. So both the legal approval form and my initial request form get sent down to the legal request process. So I'm actually going to call this form and put an instance of it in my parent process. And then I'm just going to transfer forms back and forth. So I have this form actions activity. And most of the time, when we do a form actions activity, we're doing it because we want to take a different form and make it the default form for the process timeline. But I don't want to do that in this case. The default form for this process timeline is my generic request form. And so that's the one that I want to be the primary form. However, as we'll see whenever we look at the form, I do need my legal approval form to be part of this timeline, even though it is not going to be the default form in this timeline, because I'm doing a little form magic. I need to be able to transfer some values from my default form, which is the generic request form, to the legal approval form. The easiest way for me to do that, or to make that happen, is just to go ahead and add the legal approval form here to my process timeline before I call the sub process, which is my legal approval process. We'll take a look at the form and we'll explain why I'm doing this in a little more detail. Suffice it to say, for now, I need to have both the generic request form and the legal approval form in my parent timeline before I call the sub process via my process activity. Now, there's always the question of what happens if the lawyers don't approve it. Well, I have a rollback branch activity here in my process, and it is going to branch back to my approval one activity. Now, as always, whenever we put a branch activity into a process timeline, we need a needed when condition to determine whether or not that branch is going to run. Now, in my case, there is a legal approval form control on the legal approval form that says legal has approved, and I want to check to be sure that that is checked. If it is, I'm just going to skip this activity. If it is not checked, then I want to kick off the branch activity, and I'm going to restart. I'm going to roll back actually all the way back to my first approval activity, and I'm going to restart that. Because I'm going to assume that the reason that legal kicked it back is because there was some information missing and they couldn't approve it based on the information that they had received from the initial approver. And so they're sending it back. So I need to run that initial approver step again to add whatever information they need to add, complete their task, which again will send it back to legal for the legal approval activity. And then of course, if the legal approval checkbox is checked, the rollback from legal obviously won't run, and we'll run it straight into approval 3. So I have something similar here in generic process 2. So in this one, I have a different request form and a different approval timeline. So we'll look at the different approval timeline. And as you can see, it's pretty much exactly the same process for calling that legal approval. I'm going to run the form actions activity to add the legal approval form to the parent timeline, so it has a new instance. It's going to run the process activity to call my legal review process, again transferring all objects to the child and back to the parent. And then, of course, it has the same rollback from legal, which is going to run, again, if legal approval is not checked. So those 3 activities are what I need to call my sub-process. Let's run it first, and then we'll see how it works. So let's start off with generic process 1. And let's go look over at another instance of training. Let's see what tasks I have on my task list. I have no running processes on the system. I have no tasks in my task list. Great. So now we're going to give ourselves some tasks. So we're going to kick off our generic request form. We're going to run that. Now, this is the generic request form. This is not the legal approval form. It is a completely different form. So I am going to put in whatever my explanation is. I've got another field and yet another field that might require some information. I'm going to submit my form. And now I am in the approval one activity. And we can look down here. It says approval one. And obviously, let me move this out of the way just a little bit so I can click back up here. And we can see that if we refresh my task list and we refresh my running processes, I've got one process running. I'm in approval one on request number 598. So as the first approver, I'm looking at this. I make whatever changes are appropriate to make, and then I submit it. The form goes away. Let's take a look at what's happening. All right, I am now in the paralegal review step, and I have two processes running. So I am now running both this form is now running in two separate processes. So I have two different approval timelines running. I'm still in the initial approval loop on the main form. I'm also now in the legal approval. And that legal approval is assigning me the paralegal review step. And so when I open up my legal approval form, I'm looking at the legal approval form. Now, it has the same information. It all got transferred over from my original request form. So I have the information I need. Now, note, only the explanation field is transferred over in this specific case. The other two fields that were on that form, that were on that original request form, they're not transferred over. I don't care about them for purposes of legal review. So fine, we have our paralegal review. I decide that nobody else really needs to see it. It just needs to go by the GC for their approval. So I'm going to go ahead and complete my task. Now I'm in the GC step, so reviewed by GC. So I'll give my commentary. I'll say that it has been approved. And now we're done with my general counsel approval. And again, the form goes away. If we refresh now, I'm still running those two processes, but they're about to go away. And the process is technically still running because the parent process is still running. So we're still seeing both of these processes here, but they're about to go away because now I'm in approval 3 step. So when I open it, I'm back on my generic request form. And here's all of my original form data. But now I've got this legal review process that is opened up, or this legal review section that is opened up, so that I can see that it was reviewed by legal, and I can hit review complete. And that ends my task, and that ends the running processes on my system. So I can do the same thing with the second process. We'll do it with a little less explanation this time. This time we'll open up a different request form and run it. And obviously it has some different fields here, which I should probably have filled out in order, but whatever, fine. And we're going to submit that. And we go into our approval 1, and we'll go ahead and submit that. Once again, we are out of our initial review process. We are now in the sub process. So once again, we're in the paralegal review step. We'll say it requires contract review. We'll finish our paralegal review. Now I've got my contract review. We'll put in whatever commentary I need there. We'll complete our task. Now I'm in the general counsel review, and I can say, okay, this has definitively been approved by legal. I can submit it. Once again, I'm back in approval 3, back in my main process, and there's all of my legal stuff. It is back on my main form, and my approval is complete. it all worked fine. Now, there was, as you may have noticed, a lot of form field transference that was going on there. So let's take a look and see how I built this particular version. On both the generic request form and a different request form, we need to look at the fields and the field properties. Well, keep clicking the wrong thing. We need to look at some of the field properties. So let's just go ahead and go to the Form Controls tab. That will be the easiest way to see this because there are 4 fields here that have some special little icons. It is that diagonally downward to the right little arrow icon that you see. What this indicates for these 4 fields, so the request info, the request number, submission date, and submitter, we open up the field properties for those forms. And by the way, we could do this in the form design as well. It's just easier to see them all together here in this particular instance. They all have the synchronize field within process checkbox checked. We don't really talk about synchronize field within process enough, but it is super useful and super convenient. What this does is, if you have 2 forms in the same process, and both of those forms have a field, which in this case is named request info, if they both have the same name, request info, what I am saying is, I want this request info field to be synced in the process. So any other form that gets created in this process that has a request info field on that form, I want the value of this form field to automatically be replicated into the form field with the same name on the other form. So some caveats about using this. Only one form field on one form. Well, let me back up because I was about to explain that in a very confusing way. If I have 2 forms or 3 forms or 5 forms, all of which have a request info field on those forms, I can choose one and only one of the request info fields on one and only one of those 2, 3, 4, or 5 forms. And that will be the source field for all of the other form fields on different forms in the same process that have the same name. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm picking a canonical source field that I want replicated everywhere else on every other form in the process where that form has a form field of the same name, which in this case is request info. What I do not want to do is to click synchronize field within process on the same field on 2 different forms. I'm going to be super unhappy with how that works. Because what's going to happen is it is going to continuously try to overwrite the other field, which also has this checkbox clicked as a source field. And I'm never going to be sure that I know what the value is of any of these fields because I have multiple replications going on. That's always going to be a problem. It's always going to fail. We are not going to prevent you from doing it. We'll just say straight up that if you do it, you're making a mistake and you're going to see unexpected results. Mark one field. And by the way, we don't really have any way of vetting that in the system. We don't really have any way of going in and saying, well, hey, you click synchronize field on this form, on this request info field. Now on this form, you've done it again. Because honestly, we don't know, at least not at design time. We simply don't know that Form 2 is going to be included in the process for Form 1. When you're designing the forms, we don't know that. We don't know ultimately in terms of, I don't mean we as BP Logics, but the system itself. It simply doesn't know that you're going to be using 2 or 3 or 5 forms in this process timeline. Because when I'm going in here and editing the form, I'm kind of in a bubble here. I don't know how that form is ultimately going to be used. I don't know if that form is going to be called by another timeline and whether it is a mistake to have this checkbox checked. So this is something that you have to do yourself to ensure that it is configured correctly, and you might make a mistake. I just don't know how we would help you not make that mistake, because when you're designing a form, we don't know what other forms are going to be included in the timeline with that form. We don't really know what timelines this form is going to be included with, honestly, because we don't have that sort of direct linkage, and there's obviously no forward-looking. Like, let's say I haven't even built a timeline and I build 2 different forms. They're not assigned to any timeline, and I start clicking synchronize field within process. Well, there's no way for me to fix that. So we don't vet this. You have to do that yourself and ensure that you select one and only one form field with this name in that process to ensure that it is properly replicated. Once you do that, though, this field will be replicated on every form automatically. So what I'm doing for this particular form is I have 4 fields that I want to replicate whenever it calls the sub process. I want to replicate the submitter, the submission date, the request number, and the explanation field. Those 4 fields are going to get replicated. Now, I've also got to do this backwards from the legal approval form. I need to be sure that my legal commentary and whether or not this was approved by legal, I need to know that they are going to go back to the other form that is included in the process. Because remember, at this point, we now have 2 forms that are going to be included in both processes. In the parent process, I'm going to have the request form and the legal form. They're both going to get sent down to the legal process, and then from the legal process, they're both going to be sent back up to the parent process. And so they're both going to be in the same process in both processes. So in this case, the legal commentary field, oops, I unchecked it. The legal commentary field is synchronized, and the approved by legal is, oops, it got out of field properties. It is synchronized as well. So now the values in this field will be sent back to my parent form. So that will take care of that. And when this runs, all of my form fields will be synchronized back and forth. So that is why I'm sort of forgetting what I'm trying to do, but I'm trying to look for the form instance so that I can bring it back up. And so that is how I get the data from my legal approval form back into this generic request form. And of course, as we saw, if we were to open up the request form, so let's go to our legal approval form and do the same thing there and pop open this one. That's how I get my explanation and my submitter and my submission date and my request number back into my legal approval form. All right, this is one way of doing it, and this is probably the most complete method of getting it set up. Now, if you want a copy of this, please let me know, and we'll send you off a copy. Now, I do want to note a couple of things about this specific configuration. This specific configuration assumes that this legal approval is a standalone process, that it has its own form. and that it has its own process timeline. So when we look at the legal approval form, there's two things that I have to do, and actually two things that I have to do for all of the sub processes. I've got to configure that form replication, that form field replication correctly across the board. Excuse me, give me a second here. I seem to have left my mail open and I'm seeing notifications. And while I don't particularly mind seeing them, I'm not sure I want to make them all public. So for safety's sake, let me turn off Outlook. Forgive me. So on the legal approval form, I need to ensure that I have, well, both on the legal approval form and on all of my request forms, I need to ensure that I have the same fields for replication. So on the legal approval form, I have request info and request number and submission date and submitter. These names have to be, the names for those four fields have to be exactly the same as those same names on the generic request form. So request info, submission date, submitter, etc. That also means that for my second process, I need those exact same four fields on the request form, and they have to be the same four fields that are on the legal approval form, because I've got to have the same names in order to replicate the field values from one form to another. Conversely, on the legal approval form, legal approved and legal commentary, those are the names of the fields, which means that on my generic request form, I am going to need legal approved and legal commentary, because those are going to be the recipient fields from those same two fields that are on the legal review form, and they need to be replicated backwards. Now, this is a bit of a complexity, I grant you, because to make this work, I have to ensure that I have some specific fields that have the same name on every single form that I create. So you're going to have to just keep note of, anytime I'm going to use any sort of legal approval, I'm going to be locked into certain specific fields that need to be sent to the legal approval form, and they have to have specific names so that I can send them along properly. Now, on the legal review process, when this process gets kicked off, process director needs to know, what is my primary form? Now, if I kick off the legal approval process by the submission of the legal approval form, then it doesn't really matter. It's the only form that is, or the only form instance that will be attached to the process instance when it gets invoked. And so it doesn't really matter what I do. On the other hand, when I kick off this process as a sub-process, I'm going to be passing it two form instances. I'm going to be passing it an instance of the legal approval form, and I'm going to be passing it an instance of whichever request form, in this case, generic process 1 or generic process 2's request form. All right, well, now it's got two request forms. Which is the default form? So the very first thing I'm going to do on the legal request is I'm going to run another form actions activity. And I'm just going to set the legal approval of form as the default form instance for the timeline. This is kind of a belt and suspenders kind of thing that I am doing here, because in the options for it itself, I am saying the form for timeline is the legal approval form, but there's a hole big enough to drive a truck through on that will attach form instance if needed explanatory text. And by the way, if anybody knows how to make Edge stop helping, please let me know. Don't help. I don't want help. But I technically have what should be the default form for this timeline. But when I pass it both of those forms, one of which is already the default form for the parent timeline, how is process director gonna know whether the default form for the parent timeline is the default form or whether the legal is the default form? I don't know how process director is going to try to figure that out, and I don't care because I'm going to tell process director to do it by setting the legal approval of form as the default form instance for this timeline. And that'll be fine. That'll work out just fine for us because if I am submitting the form, then it doesn't matter. It's already the default form instance, and process director will basically just skip past this and say, okay, yeah, it's supposed to be the default instance. It is. Let's move on. And it goes straight into my legal approval process. If it's not the default instance because it's called from a sub process, great. I'm just going to make it the default instance, in which case legal approval form is the form that I'm going to use. And everything's going to be, we're all going to be happy. So let's just kind of rebuild something like this from scratch. And then let's take a look. It's already 10:46. Oh, goodness. Let's try to rebuild something like this from scratch and make some magic happen here. So we're going to sort of replicate this, and we're going to do it real quick and dirty so that I can also take a look at some alternate methods to use for calling this sub process. Because we may not need to have this level of configuration. So we'll take a look at some other methods. So let's create, we're just going to create two folders. So we're just going to call this main, and we've got a main folder, and now we'll create a new folder and we'll call it legal. And so we're just going to go through the process of creating the objects that we need and calling the sub process, setting up our forms properly, and we'll just do this real quick and dirty. So let's go into legal. So we're going to create a new form definition. That's what I'm looking for. And we'll just call this legal form webinar. I should probably call it webinar legal form. I just want to be sure it has a unique name. Not that it matters too much because I am going to be deleting it ultimately. And we're going to put in a form field, and we'll just call this info. And we'll create a second one, and we'll call it legal. And these are the fields that we're going to pass back and forth. So I'm going to pass the info. Wait, am I doing the legal form? I am doing the legal form. So we're going to receive the info, and we're going to pass back the legal information to our parent form. Our parent form is going to send us the info. And like I said, and it's going to receive the legal. But in order to receive the legal info, I'm going to need to go into field properties, and I'm going to have to hit synchronize field within process. So we're only going to use those two fields because we don't want to make this any more complicated than necessary. If you want the full complicated one, let me know. I'll send you the completed application and you can run that. And I'm going to need a legal process. Again, we're not going to make this too complex. I'm just going to have one legal approval activity just to make it simple. We're just waiting for our form to save. And there we go. That form has saved. And now we will go in and we'll hit new process timeline. And we'll call this the webinar legal TL. And we're going to create two activities. And we're going to make activity 2 dependent on activity 1. And activity 1 is just going to be a form actions activity. And we are going to set the webinar legal form as the default form instance for this timeline. And then activity 2 will simply just be a user activity. It'll be assigned to me as the timeline initiator. So we're good there. And the last thing we have to do is link our webinar legal form to our webinar legal timeline so that whenever we start this form, it kicks off our legal timeline because that's important. Okay, so we're good there. Now we'll go to the main, and this will be our main process. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to copy. Can I do that? Can I copy both of these forms or copy both those form fields? Now we'll go into main and we'll create a new form definition, which we will call webinar main. And we'll hit paste and see if it'll paste those two form fields properly. It does. There's info and there is legal. We're going to turn off the synchronize on legal, but we're going to turn it on for main. And that's really all we care about on this form. So now we have the same fields and we have two-way replication going. So now this is the field, the main or the info field is the one that gets synchronized to the legal. And then the legal field is the one that will get synchronized back into the main form. And of course, we have to wait for this to save as well. So I can enjoy some coffee while we wait for an extended period of time. We'll save and close our main form. Now we got to create our timeline. Now, two things that we have to do to make this process timeline work. So we'll call this the main TL webinar. Let's spell that correctly. We're going to add 4 activities here, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to set up all of their dependencies properly. So activity 1, we're going to keep as a user activity. Activity 2, we are going to once again use a form actions activity. And this time we are again going to set our legal form, but we are not going to set it as the default instance. All we're trying to do is ensure that I have a copy of the webinar legal form, as well as an instance of the webinar legal form kicked off on the main timeline, just as I do an instance of the main request form. So we're going to have to set that as our form actions activity. And then, of course, we have to call our legal review process. So this will be a process activity. And happily, the two copy up and copy down checkbox are already checked. So we don't even have to do anything there. All we have to do is go into start process when this activity begins and pick our webinar legal timeline. So what should happen is I have my activity 1. That's my initial approval activity. Basically, it's there just so that we can see that the form was submitted and what have you. Then we'll add the second form instance for the legal form to this timeline. We'll kick off the legal activity. When it finishes, while it's running, this process timeline instance will remain in hold because we are running it synchronously. And when it finishes, we'll come back to activity 4. I should probably discuss this in slightly more detail. I just said and then alighted right past that we're going to run this activity synchronously. The presumption that I'm going to make is that in most cases, when you are calling these callable sub processes, that you want them to run synchronously and not asynchronously. In other words, when I kick off this second process, I want my first process to run synchronously, which is to say, I want it to pause and remain in a pause state or a wait state until the sub process completes. When the sub process completes, that will automatically complete activity 3, and then activity 4 is going to run. So while activity 3 is running, and what has actually happened is activity 3 gets started. Activity 3 calls the sub process, and then activity 3 remains running in a wait condition until my sub process completes. When it does, it sends a message back up to activity 3 that says, hey, I'm done. Activity 3 can then say, fine, I will now complete myself. Activity 3 will complete, and then it will move on to activity 4. There is another alternative to doing this. What if I want it to run synchronously? Or I'm sorry, asynchronously, which is to say that I want my main process to continue running while the sub process runs. Now, you can do that, but you can't do it with a process activity. In that case, what you would have to do is kick off a custom task activity, and the custom task you're looking for is going to be under process, and it is going to be the run process activity, or the run process custom task. We can now add that and we can configure it. So what the run process activity does is it just invokes the other process without pausing. Basically what happens is, and we're going to have to wait for this form to compile before it'll display it for us. But what happens when you run something asynchronously is it just kicks off this activity, which, as we said, is just a custom task activity. All it's going to do is kick off the custom task. And once the custom task is successfully invoked, then this activity is done and it will move directly to activity 4. In which case, both my sub process and activity 4 will be running at the same time. From a process management perspective, the method that you use to invoke your sub process depends entirely upon really your preference for how the process works. I would urge you, however, I think in a case like legal approval, you really don't want to run it asynchronously. Your choice between whether you run it asynchronously or synchronously really depends on sort of the real world business process that you're trying to implement. I think it would probably be in most cases unwise to kick off a legal approval activity, which will run asynchronously and will take, however long it takes, a week or 2 weeks. And then you just continue along with your main activity, which could conceivably complete. I mean, I could finish this timeline before my asynchronous legal process completes. And so if I've completed this timeline and I've approved something, and then the legal team comes back and says, no, then I'm probably in a bad spot legally. I may have just opened up my company to some significant tortious liability. The other problem with running something like these sub-processes asynchronously is what happens if legal doesn't approve? What happens if legal comes back and says, nope, sorry, this is not legal. You can't do this. Well, how do there's no way for me to implement a rewind or a rollback or other sort of branch in my main activity if I'm running the sub process asynchronously, because the operation of this parent process depends on whether or not legal approves it. And the only way that I can tell whether or not legal approves it is to look at the legal form, or at least to look at the values that were pulled from the legal form. And those may or may not exist if I run it asynchronously. So yes, technically you could run it asynchronously. You just have to keep in mind, okay, am I happy with my main process ending before the sub process ends? Obviously, if it's a legal process, there is an excellent chance that you will not be happy. But for other processes, you might be. And second, if the second approval process that I run, if they decide not to approve it, is that a possibility? I mean, is that process an advisory process where they're just giving me comments that I may or may not care about? Or is their approval real, and does it matter? So I've got to figure those two things out. And if they don't approve, what happens in my main process? If the answer is, I don't care what happens in the sub process, it's advisory, I don't care if my main process ends before the sub process ends, then running it asynchronously is fine. If the answer to, does the approval in the sub process matter? If the answer is yes in any way, and especially if the answer is, if they don't approve, does that affect my main process? Then you cannot run it asynchronously. You would have to run it synchronously, because you can't really continue with your main process until that sub process completes. So in this case, and probably in most, although not all cases, you really do want to run the process timeline activity and pause your process. Now, look, that doesn't necessarily mean that the entire process has to stop while you're running activity 3. Let's talk about that in a second, because let's just ensure that this thing works now that I've gone through and I think I've configured it correctly. Let's just go back and be sure that it works. I just need to be sure that webinar main calls my main webinar timeline. So I need to be sure that I have that link running. So I'm surprised I didn't forget that. And now we can run it. I think I hit update and run. I hope so. So I have the information here. I'm not going to fill this out. This is legal stuff. Technically, I probably wouldn't even see it on my form. I'm just going to go ahead and submit it. And I should now be in activity 1. Well, I really should have put in the system variable for activity running name up there, shouldn't I? So that we know where we are. And now my form goes away. Well, I do know where I am simply by looking at my task list. So now I've got the webinar legal form submitted, and I'm in activity 2 of that. Okay, great. There's my data, and I can complete that. The form goes away again, and now I'm back in activity 4 on my main form, and now I can complete my, oh, you know what I should have done and didn't do? I should have put in some legal stuff, shouldn't I? I didn't do that. So let's do at least a little bit of changing some activity names here. So on my, instead of calling it activity 1, we'll just call this paralegal. That way we'll have some idea of what the name is. Oh, that is not paralegal. That is my form. Okay, so form, close there. We'll call this activity the user activities. Those are the ones I need to change. We'll call that, actually, let's just call it legal. Since there's only one activity. So now I've got legal approval. Okay, that's a better name. We'll go back to our main timeline, and we'll call this one initial review. And these are my two form activities. And so activity 4, we'll call final review main. And let's call this initial review main so that we're sure of where we are. And while we're here, let's save that. Let's just show it up on the form so that we can see it on the form. It really is important that even in a development environment, that you do drop in activity running name on your forms. Activity, is that underscore? Running name. Normally, I would drop this inside a system variable control, but not gonna. I'm just gonna throw the text in there. We're just playing around with it. So there's no reason to get quite that formal. Oh, please save. Save, save, save. Well, that took long enough. And now that we've done that, let's go into our legal form and let's just drop that into the top of the legal form too. And that will give us a little better idea just looking at the form on where we are, although we will be able to see it on the task list as well. So as soon as this saves, we will close it and we'll run our main form again. We'll have a little better idea of what we're looking at. Okay, so now we go back to main. Let's run it again. Let's do it right this time. We submit our form. We are now in the initial review main. Nothing for me to do now. I will complete it. The form will go away. So I'm going to have to switch back over here to my task list. And I'm now running legal approval. And for the legal approval, I'm going to go ahead and complete that. That will close our form again. And now I'm in final review main as my task. So I should be going back. There's my task, and my legal stuff has now been replicated back over to the main form. Okay, so that is essentially a quick and dirty rebuilding of what we did up here on this more formal completed application. The nice thing about this is that you can build it out quick. But is this the only way to build it? Well, the answer is no, it's not. So we're going to, actually, I needed to create multiple folders here. So now we're going to get into a little experimentation. So let's call this formal. So this is really a formal legal review process that technically has its own standalone legal process that it goes through. So I could submit the legal review form as a standalone. So it is a real working process. I just happen to be leveraging this real working process as a sub-process for other process timelines. Now, the main assumption that we're making here is that I need the legal review to be a real formal process. And I guess as far as the process goes, it does need to be a formal process. But what if I don't need to actually, what if it doesn't need to be a formal process? What if I really am never going to have a situation where I say, I need some legal advice, I'm going to kick off the legal form? I mean, that may very well be the case. You may only be asking for legal advice like this in the context of some other process. In which case, there are some hoops that I simply don't have to jump through. I don't have to make this a fully standalone process with its own form submission, possibly even its own knowledge views, its own reports, and all the other stuff that I might have to do. What if I just need this legal timeline to run? And I don't want to go through the inconvenience, and it is an inconvenience, by the way, of, okay, well, this webinar legal form. Well, I've got to run that as part of the legal review process. And I've got to have it set up so that when somebody submits it, they provide me with, the submitter, the submission date, the request number, the explanation that they provide. All of that stuff has to be provided from scratch if I'm running it as a legal approval form. But I've also got to set up all of my other processes to pass this information to the legal approval form. And by the way, I have to use the legal approval form. It is going to be the default form for this process timeline, which means that whatever my request form is and whatever fields it has, I'm going to have to go and pick the fields that I want to give to the lawyers via form replication to send them off to the lawyers. What if I don't need to have quite that level of formality? So let's go around and play around with a slightly different and simpler way of doing this. We'll call this informal. So we'll create a new folder and we'll call it informal. So by the way, if you are waiting for the portion of the webinar where everything might go wrong, this is it. Because we're going to try to cowboy our way through this. So we're going to make a folder. Again, we're going to call it main. And then I'll make another folder. And we'll call it legal. And we'll hit OK here. Now, what I want to do is I want to use the legal process, and I still want to call it as a separate sub-process. But what I don't want to have to do is use the legal form, and I don't want to have to pass information from my main form to the legal form. I'd kind of like to keep everything the same. Okay, well, let's build up a little simpler version of this. Now, I still need my legal process. It still needs to be separate. I still want to have it separate so that I only have to configure it in one place, but I can call it in a lot of places. But I'm going to have to play this a little fast and loose with how I configure this. So we're going to create a process timeline, and we're going to call this informal legal TL. So first of all, let me tell you specifically what I am not going to do. I am not going to specify a form for timeline. I'm going to leave it blank. Now, that means that if this process timeline runs, there's no form that is going to be associated with it. Let me create an activity. And again, we don't need to get too complex here. We'll just call this legal approval 1. And we'll create a second one, legal approval 2. And we'll make legal approval 2 dependent on legal approval 1 so that they'll both run in sequence. So, as I said, we're not going to add a form for timeline. So if I run this timeline, which I can, by the way, I can just run it right here from the content list. It'll ask me if I'm sure I want to start it, and it will start it. Now, there's no form associated with it. So what it's going to show me is this form that has been built into Process Director. It's pre-compiled, and it says, okay, well, fine, you're now in legal approval one. All right, well, I guess I can complete it. And then it'll throw me into legal approval two. And of course, it has to recompile that form. Well, it didn't throw me into legal approval two, but I am in legal approval two. It just didn't keep the form open for me. Well, again, there is no form, so there's no form to keep open for me. But now I'm in legal approval two, and I can complete my timeline. Great. Now, that's what happens when you don't have a form for timeline. Now, if I come back up here to legal review process, well, that's not really where I wanted to come back up to. I wanted to come up to my legal review folder, and then I wanted to run the legal review process. When I run the legal review process, I have a form. The form for timeline property is set. So anytime this gets invoked, if there is no legal approval form that is associated with the timeline, it's going to create an instance of it and associate it with it automatically. But that's not going to happen in this informal process. It literally is just a timeline that has no form. And this is intentional, because what I need to be able to do is supply it the form from whatever process that calls it. Now, of course, what this means is that this is no longer really a standalone process. There's no legal review process that I can call. So this is always going to be a subordinate process that's always going to depend for all of its data and everything else on whatever the parent process is. Now, in some ways, that's great because it gives me some flexibility for making this work. So we'll go to our main, and this is what we're going to use. This is our main process, and it's what we're going to use to call our process timeline. So we're going to go ahead and create a form, and we'll call it the informal main form. And now it doesn't really matter what fields I have on this form. So, and I don't have to worry about replication. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I can just put whatever fields I need to put on that form. Now, obviously, there's probably some fields that I'm going to want on this form that the legal people are going to have to fill out, but this is going to be my main form. In fact, let's be sure that we should all know just by looking at it, but we're going to call it the main form, and we're going to make it a heading 1 so that we know that this is our main form. And we're going to have to go ahead and create a timeline for it as well. So let's let it save. And now we can create our new process timeline. And we'll just call this the informal main TL. And for this timeline, sure, I am going to set the form for timeline because in general, you should. And I'm also going to have to go back to the form and set it to start this timeline when the form is submitted. We'll do that in a second. Normally, of course, I'd have a default email template and whatnot, but right now we only need to worry about the form. And now I can create some activities. I'm going to create 3, and I'm going to set their dependents like that. And I'm going to call activity 1. I'm just going to call it initial main, and activity 3, which is another user activity. It will always be a user activity. I'll call this initial final, or I'm sorry, main final. So it should be, what do I call the other one? Initial main? Maybe I should call it final main. I think I called the other one initial main. I'll call this one final main. So these are the two user activities. It's activity 2 here that we're going to use to call our process. Now, what we're not going to do, well, we can't. There's no legal form, so we're not going to have a set form or a form actions process timeline activity. All we're going to do is just call the process. So we're just going to set this to a process activity. We are going to go to the process tab. And again, we're going to copy objects from the sub process to the main process and vice versa. And we are going to start our informal main TL. So we're going to run this, and I'm not sure that it's going to work. And I'll tell you why in a second here. But we're going to go to main. We're going to go to our informal main form. We're going to run it, and we're going to put in some information, and we're going to submit it. Okay, so this will send me to my, oh, you know what I said? I was supposed to go here and automatically start this process. Yeah, I didn't do that. Now I have. So now we're going to start our informal main form again, now that it will actually start a process. And we're going to submit it. And I didn't put in the running activity name again. So we're going to do some switching here. So I'm in my initial main activity, which I will complete. The form will go away. And now I am in my, let's see, it still says initial main. So let me submit that again. Okay, it's staying in the same activity. What is going on here? I seem to have done something wrong with my timeline. Well, no, that's the initial main. So it should run. It's depend on. All right. It seems like it's in some sort of loop. I have no idea why it would be in a loop. Should go to activity 2, which is process. Oh, well, I restarted the same timeline over and over again. I want to start the legal timeline, not restart the main timeline. I'm going to assume that that means that I have about 5 active timelines running. So let's delete them since I kept restarting the same timeline over and over again. Let's try this one more time. And we submit, and the form will reload. We should be in our initial main activity as expected. So now we will submit. Now my form goes away, and what I hope to see when I reload is that I am in legal approval 1. So let us, this is cool. It did work. I was worried about something happening that didn't happen, which I would have had to try to fix, but because it didn't happen, I don't have to tell you what I was worried about. It worked as expected. So what's going on here? Well, I have my main form. It is part of my main process. That instance exists. And by the way, I'm legal here, so I'm just going to put in legal stuff, the famous legal phrase of and I'm going to complete that. And I'll get back to explaining why it works in a second. Oh, did I submit it? Apparently I didn't submit it. What happened there? Complete? Oh, I had two legal approval things, not one. Okay. And now I'm back in final main. And so I open it up and I'm in final main. Now I can complete it. Now I'm done with my timeline. So what just happened? Well, remember how I said earlier, we weren't going to set this property? Well, there was a reason why we weren't going to set this property. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this form down to the sub process. That's why in my process timeline for the main timeline, it's super important that I check both of these checkboxes. Because I've got a form instance, but for my informal legal timeline, there is no form instance. We saw that there's no form instance earlier. But I am going to pass it the instance for my informal main form. So when this timeline gets invoked, there is an active form instance sitting there just waiting to be used. So whenever this process timeline starts for me, it's going to say, okay, what's my form? Well, that doesn't give me any help. So it's obviously not that, but I do have this instance just sitting here. Why don't I make that my primary form? Great. Make it your primary form. We'll be off to the races. In fact, now that I can do that, what I'm going to do is we're going to go here to legal and we're going to take main and we're going to copy and we're going to we're not going to copy it here. Okay. So let's create a new folder and we'll call it main 2. And yeah, I might as well just build a form. So let's just rebuild it. We'll call it main 2. And in this case, we'll give it 1, 2, 3. Let's give it a drop down too. Here's a drop down. So we'll give it a drop down item and let's throw in, I don't want to throw in a radio button control. I do not like radio button controls. I like radio button lists because they're list controls. And yeah, we'll let it run vertically. All right, so now I've got a new form. It's a different form. It's not the same main form. And we're going to save it. And we're going to create a process timeline for it. As soon as it saves, as soon as it saves, one of the horrible things about doing this live is having to keep talking to ensure that there's not excessive dead air while you're waiting for these dumb things to save. And finally it's saved. So now we can create a new process timeline and we'll call this main TL2. And we'll again create 3 activities. main to review, and we'll call this one main to done. And of course, we'll create our dependencies by dragging and dropping. And this time, when we pick our process, we're going to pick the legal process first time out of the box. Well, I almost picked the wrong process anyway. We're going to pick that legal timeline process. So we'll set that. So we're good there. We are going to set our form for timeline, as we should, to main 2. And we are going to go to main 2. Eventually. And we are going to start our main 2 timeline the way that we're supposed to. And so now we can run main 2. Now I have a completely different form, which I can submit. It takes me into my initial main activity. So we'll just watch it here. So that's our main 2 review activity. So that's our initial review, and we'll complete that. The form should go away, which it does, which means I should be in legal approval 1, which I actually have to invoke. And there I'm using a completely different form, but it's a completely different form for the same process timeline, because this informality of it just allows me to throw forms at this process timeline, which does not have a form of its own. And it is so desperate for companionship that it will accept the companionship of any form instance that I deign to give it, and it will be perfectly happy to do so. That was legal approval 1, so I should be moving now to legal approval 2, which I am. And if I complete legal approval 2, my form should go away. And I should be back to main 2 done. So I'm just going to re-invoke it. And there we go. I have my form back. All of my information is complete. Now, this is much more simple as a method of invoking a callable subprocess, because I can just use the same form. I don't have to jump through all of the hoops that I did initially for building my callable subprocess. Now, the reason why I had to jump through all of these hoops, remember, is that my legal approval is a formal standalone process. It needs its own form. It needs its own process timeline. So if I'm going to do it that way, that's going to add some complication. I'm going to need to use field replication to send data back and forth between whatever my main request form is and my legal approval form. And I'm similarly going to have to send, via field replication, data back from my main or my legal approval form back to my main form. So that field replication is going to make things a little more complex, because I've got to be sure, A, that I am replicating the correct fields as the source field on my main form to my legal form, and that I'm replicating the legal fields as the source fields back to my main form. I'm probably on my main form. And by the way, I did this. I don't know if you noticed that I did it, because I'm not sure that I called it out while we were doing it, but the legal review was not even visible. I hate it that it does that. Legal review. There we go. So my legal review is only visible whenever my activity reached legal approval. And I have to ensure that my legal commentary and my approved by legal fields have the exact same names as they have on the legal form. So I've got to do that. Also, in my processes, I've got to add my legal approval form to the parent process so I can send it down. And I also, because I'm sending it to forms on my legal approval process timeline, I've also got to do a set form as well to set my legal approval form as the main form for the process timeline, which, by the way, is in itself kind of confusing, because now, well, it's not confusing for your lawyers, because your lawyers always see the legal approval form. Your main requesters never see the legal approval form. So your legal people and the people who are part of your main process, you are seeing two entirely different forms. Now, field replication makes the data flow back and forth, but you're not looking at the same form at the same time. You are sending data back and forth. By the way, if you don't like field replication, you don't have to use it. You can make things a little more complicated by, in your process timeline, you could add a copy form data custom task right before you show the legal form, for example, right before you show the legal form for paralegal review. So after set form, but before paralegal review. You could actually do I would do it before set form if I was doing it. It would be the very first thing I would do on the timeline. I would invoke a custom task activity, and I would use the copy form data custom task. Both instances are part of the process timeline. So if you didn't want to use field replication, not sure why you wouldn't, but if you didn't, you also have the option of running copy form data, and then you can just copy the data from the original request form to the legal request form. But you're going to have some way of making that happen because you have the original form and you have the request form. Now, the question would arise, okay, well, how come I can't have it as a standalone form or a standalone process and still use the form for the parent request? Technically, you could, except for one thing. When I go to the set form and I try to determine what is the default form for this process timeline, well, I got to pick one. I don't know what process is going to be calling this as a sub-process. So I don't know what the default form for this timeline should be or could be other than the legal approval form, because I don't know what other request forms are being sent. So the one drawback to having a formal process like this is that you really kind of got to use the legal approval form all of the time. And that means that you're going to have to get data back and forth between the main request and legal approval and all the other hoops that we saw here. You're going to have to jump through. You're jumping through them because if I don't use the legal approval form, I don't know what the primary form for this process timeline is. Now, there are some advantages to this system, even though it is more complex, because you may be thinking, well, with all of these hoops I got to jump through, it just seems like a pain. Well, let's take a look at it from the end user point of view. Your legal team always sees exactly the same thing for legal approval. You probably don't have to show them a lot of the ancillary information. There are probably some documents and things like that you have to send them for their review and whatnot. In fact, they may only need to see documents. You may not need to send them any field values at all, although I suspect you do, just in terms of some sort of instructions or questions that you might ask. But from the legal department's point of view, they have a standardized request or review process for everything that you send them. So they will never see anything that frightens or confuses them because they have a process for legal review. It is the same process whether it gets started de novo by going ahead and submitting the legal review form. And they use the same process if you are asking for legal approval for marketing or personnel actions or anything else that you need legal approval on. They see the same thing. I don't think it's either an advantage or disadvantage that your regular requestees in your main processes They don't see the legal request form. And who cares whether they see it or not? All they care about is whether any legal comments get sent back and whether or not it got approved by legal. They don't really care about the legal request form. So a system like this, while it is harder to set up and it is more complex, does offer some key advantages from a user point of view, especially for your legal team, in that they always know what a legal request looks like. Now, that's probably going to require that paralegal review because at some point, someone is going to have to sit and look at the request information that you've given them so that they understand, okay, does this implicate intellectual property? Do I got to send it off to IP? Is this contract related? Is it regulatory? Where does this have to go within the division for the appropriate review and approval? But that's just sort of baked into the approval process cake. And the disadvantage or the disadvantage of this more informal process that we looked at last is that your legal people are going to see all of the different forms with all of the information because you're just using this legal timeline as just an additional way of having other people see your initial request form. Again, that may be a good or bad thing depending on your use case. I can't really advise you on that, but you will be showing your lawyers a lot of stuff that they probably don't care to see and don't care about and ultimately don't need to see. But you got options. So you can do it either of these two ways. Both of them work and both of them allow you to have, in this case, we've been talking about legal because that was the easiest thing I could think of. If you're in a university, there may be some approval that has to go through the chancellor's office. There may have to be financial approvals that or other approvals that implicate financial stuff that may have to go through the bursar's office. You can probably think of a lot of different contexts in which a standalone process could be used as a sub-process. I've given you a couple of different ways of doing that. We've talked about some of the business cases for doing it one way or the other. So how you implement something like this is up to you, but you should be aware that this is an option that's available to you, and you can go the full-scale formal route, which, while a little more difficult to set up, once you have it running, is a very nice and very understandable system, and certainly makes things easier for your legal team because they get to see the same thing all the time. On the other hand, the informal method allows you to build this stuff on the fly, and you don't have to worry about all this stuff like field replication and getting all that wrong. Everything just works right out of the box. So in terms of ease of development, maybe that is your primary concern. Either way, you have a way of building callable sub-processes that you can use anywhere that you need them. And with that, we are done. Have a great week. I will look forward to speaking with you again next week. Until then, so long.